Farmer Joe awoke to an unusual sight. His fields were covered in strange black objects. They weren't rocks or debris, but something entirely different. He knew he needed answers quickly and called in an expert. As the man inched closer to the objects, his face grew pale with concern. "Joe, pack your things and get out now," the expert warned. Farmer Joe had never seen anything like this before. He already had one of the worst weeks of his farming career, and he feared that this bizarre discovery would only make things worse for him. He had only been away from his beloved field for a couple of days. How could it possibly overflow with all these strange black things? But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. The horror week had started with the warning of extreme weather conditions by the news. There was set to fall an unprecedented amount of rain in the area where Joe's farm was located. Joe stayed with his brother for a couple of days until the storm passed. It followed all the developments on the news closely and was horrified to see that the storm was even worse than predicted. When the storms finally passed, he wasted no time in getting back to his lands. He had already called other farmers in the hope they were able to take a look for him, but most also had not arrived back at their own farm or had enough on their plate to deal with. His and all the other farms around seemed to have been unable to deal with the overflow of water. You could barely see most of the fields anymore, as they were just very large puddles of water. As Joe was passing these overflow fields, his heart sank a bit, but he also knew that this would not have to be a problem they would not be able to overcome. When he finally arrived back at his own fields, Joe realized that he had to deal with something very different than all the other farmers. His farmlands were in fact also overflowing with water, but there was something else to be seen. He had no idea what these things were exactly, but spread out all over the water on his fields were hundreds of small black objects that he could simply not divine. The strangest thing was that Joe had not seen these black objects on any other fields but his own. The old man was probably as confused as he was, and when Joe pulled up in his driveway, he was quickly approached by him. Joe could see that he was very worried. He asked Joe what the hell this was, and of course Joe had no idea, but he would deal with it. But that clearly was not enough to relax his neighbor. Joe was confused as to why he cared so much, seeing as these black objects only appeared on his fields. But the old man explained that he was afraid that this would lead to a big investigation into what these things were, and that could affect all the farmers around. Joe felt like he needed to do something about this quickly, and preferably with the involvement of as few people as possible. But for him to be able to do anything, he would first need to figure out what the hell he was dealing with. Joe gathered the neighboring farmers and spoke with urgency. "We need to keep this quiet. If word gets out, we'll have investigators all over our land." The farmers exchanged uneasy glances but nodded in agreement. They trusted Joe's judgment and understood the need for discretion. With the farmers' agreement, Joe decided to take a closer look at the mysterious black objects. He carefully walked into his field, feeling the mud squish under his boots. As he reached one of the objects, he realized it wasn't just debris. They were strong black bags, each one tethered to the ground by thick lines. Determined to uncover the truth, Joe grabbed one of the black bags and tried to pull it up. The rope was surprisingly sturdy and resisted his efforts. He braced himself and pulled harder, but the rope remained stuck, barely budging. Joe examined the bag, noting its durability. It looked like it could withstand harsh conditions. He was tempted to cut it open, but the uncertainty of what lay inside made him pause. What if it was dangerous? Or something valuable? The questions swirled in his mind. He decided against opening it right away, realizing he needed more information before taking such a risk. Back at his farmhouse, Joe turned to the internet. He searched for any mention of black objects in fields, hoping to find a clue. Hours passed as he combed through forums and articles. His eyes grew tired, but he persisted. Finally, a post on a farming forum caught his attention. The image attached looked eerily similar to his fields. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. Joe felt a glimmer of hope as he read on. After hours of searching, Joe's eyes landed on a photo on a farming forum. It looked almost identical to his fields, with strange black objects scattered around. His heart raced with excitement and curiosity. He clicked on the image, hoping it would lead him to some answers. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was the closest thing he'd found. Joe leaned in closer, eager to read more and uncover the mystery. The forum post was months old, written by a farmer facing the same perplexing problem. "Has anyone seen these black objects in their fields?" the post read. Joe scanned through the replies, hoping someone had offered a solution. Most comments were just as puzzled as the original poster, but there was one that stood out. Joe's curiosity piqued. This was the first solid lead he'd found. Joe knew he had to contact this person, hoping they could shed light on the bizarre situation unfolding in his fields. Joe quickly typed a message to the commenter, who identified himself as Kenny, an expert on unusual agricultural phenomena. Within minutes, Kenny responded, his message brief but promising. "Send me pictures. We need to meet." Joe hurriedly took photos of the black objects in his fields and sent them to Kenny. The reply came almost instantly, with Kenny agreeing to visit the next day. The next day, Kenny arrived in a sleek car, younger than Joe had imagined, yet confident and composed. "You must be Joe," he said with a smile. Joe nodded, hiding his surprise, and led Kenny toward the field, wondering what this stranger truly knew. On the way, Joe asked how Kenny knew about the objects. "I've seen them before," Kenny replied, offering nothing more. Joe wanted to know more but stayed silent, hoping answers would come once Kenny examined the bags. Upon reaching the field, Kenny avoided details and immediately focused on the bags. "I need to see them directly," he said. Joe watched as Kenny knelt beside one, studying it carefully. After just 2 minutes, Kenny abruptly stepped back. His calm demeanor shifted to urgency. "We need to leave. Now," he whispered. Joe felt a chill down his spine as Kenny grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the car. "No time to explain," he said. Kenny, now serious and tense, revealed, "Those bags contain something highly volatile." Joe's fear intensified. "It's not safe to discuss here," Kenny added, offering no more. Kenny then presented 2 options: contact the authorities or allow his team to discreetly remove the items. Joe hesitated, unsure who to trust. Still, the idea of a clean, quiet solution appealed to him. "You really think you can handle this?" Joe asked. Kenny nodded. "I've done it before." Joe weighed the risk of government involvement against the mystery of Kenny's team and ultimately agreed. "All right, Kenny, you and your team can take care of it." They shook hands. Joe hoped it was the right call, though doubts remained. Joe told Kenny he'd be out of town the next day, planning a trip to visit his brother. Kenny accepted the story without question. Joe packed as if leaving, but he had no intention of going far. Instead, he made a different plan. As night fell, Joe settled in with binoculars, determined to uncover Kenny's true intentions. Something didn't sit right, and his instincts told him to stay vigilant. Early the next morning, Joe watched as a car pulled up to his field. 3 individuals stepped out and moved swiftly toward the black objects. They worked with practiced efficiency, cutting the bags loose and loading them into the car. Joe's curiosity quickly turned to suspicion. Why the rush? He noticed something alarming. They weren't wearing any protective gear. If the bags were as hazardous as Kenny had claimed, why handle them so carelessly? Joe's doubts intensified. Realizing the operation was wrapping up, Joe knew he couldn't remain passive. He waited until the workers' backs were turned, then quietly left his neighbor's house, crept toward the field, and cut one of the bags loose. He hauled it back and hid it behind some bushes, heart pounding from the adrenaline. In his neighbor's backyard, Joe retrieved a leftover hazmat mask from a past project and cautiously opened the bag. A faint hiss escaped as the material gave way. What he found inside shocked him. He immediately called for his neighbor to confirm what he was seeing. Together, they stared into the open bag, stunned. "Kenny isn't here to help," Joe said quietly. The urgency, the secrecy, the hurried cleanup, it all made sense now. Joe realized Kenny had manipulated the situation to use the farm for something illicit. Without hesitation, he called the police. His voice was firm as he relayed everything. Kenny, the black bags, the strange team removing them. The dispatcher assured him help was on the way. Within minutes, flashing lights approached. Patrol cars rolled up, and officers poured out. heading straight for the fields. Joe met them and pointed toward Kenny's crew. "They're right there," he said. As sirens wailed through the air, Kenny's team panicked. Joe saw them exchange frantic glances before attempting to flee. "They're onto us," one of them shouted, but it was too late. Police closed in fast. A short chase ensued before the officers tackled the men and cuffed them. Though the immediate danger had passed, Joe knew the investigation was just beginning. Joe approached the police, holding the opened bag as evidence. "This is what they were hiding," he said. The officer examined the contents and nodded gravely. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention." Joe felt a weight lift. The authorities were now fully involved, but he sensed this was only the beginning of a deeper investigation. The three men were taken into custody, and the focus shifted to locating Kenny. Officers questioned the arrested men, searching for leads. Investigators also worked to determine who had placed the bags in Joe's field in the first place. Soon, they uncovered troubling connections to the land's past. The previous owner of Joe's farm had ties to organized crime. "This land has a dark history," an officer explained. Joe was stunned. He'd bought the property in good faith, unaware of its hidden past. Now he realized why the land had been so cheap. Digging deeper, police discovered that the prior owner had used the farm to conceal criminal gains. The investigation soon gave authorities enough to arrest the previous landowner. Both Kenny and the former owner were located and taken into custody. It became clear that Kenny had tried to profit from the hidden bags, using Joe's land as a convenient cover. He wasn't an expert, just a man who saw an opportunity. The previous owner faced harsher charges as the mastermind who planted the bags years earlier. When the bags were fully examined, they revealed stacks of hidden money, carefully wrapped and buried. "This is a fortune," an officer remarked. Joe watched in disbelief as the money was documented. His land had unknowingly become a vault for criminal assets. Many of the bags were empty, but others were still full, suggesting that not all had been recovered in time. The previous owner had clearly underestimated how many remained. His assumption that the land was cleared led to a critical mistake. Ironically, it was a natural flood that brought the bags to the surface, scattering them and initiating the chain of events. What started as a disaster revealed a hidden truth. Nature has a way of exposing everything, Joe thought. Eventually, the previous owner stood trial. Joe attended, witnessing the fall of the man who had deceived him. As details of the criminal network unfolded, justice finally took shape. One by one, the pieces came together. Joe sat in the courtroom, feeling the weight of the ordeal lift. It had been a long road, filled with fear, suspicion, and betrayal. But now, with truth and justice prevailing, he could finally breathe again.